8th level spells are kind of an awkward high level spell, in that they couldn't make the spells of 8th level too strong, otherwise they might overshadow the best spells in the game at 9th level, but they also had to be worth the wait to get at level 15 in order to cast them. So a lot of 8th level spells are a little bit underwhelming, but in this list we're going to go over the best 8th level spells that are definitely worth casting. Starting us off at number 10, we have Abby Dalzim's Horrid Wilting. Despite its incredibly long name, it's actually one of the simplest 8th level spells out there, in that it basically just deals damage within a 30-foot cube area, with extra flavor that it instantly kills plants that aren't creatures, and any plants or water elementals make the save a disadvantage, while constructs and undead aren't affected by it as it's trying to magically suck the moisture out of the area. It deals 12d8 necrotic damage on a failed save, which is more damage than upcast and a fireball at 8th level, which is kind of the threshold you have to beat for an AoE spell to be good at this level range. And this also makes Horrid Wilting the hardest hitting AoE at this level if all you count is the amount of damage it can deal in a single turn, which is what a lot of people care about when it comes to blast spells. If you want the Fireball of 8th level, it's Horrid Wilting, as Fireball deals 45.5 damage on average when you upcast at 8th level. And Horrid Wilting deals 54 damage on average, easily making it worth being cast with your 8th level spell slot if all you want is big damage. Which is why we're starting off the video with this, because it's the simplest one to evaluate. There is also Sunburst, which occupies the same spot as just being a hard-hitting, instantaneous spell, but it deals 3 less damage on average than an 8th level Fireball, and obviously deals less damage than Horrid Wilting. However, Sunburst has a 60-foot radius, which is literally 3 times as big as Fireball, which is already famous for having a very large radius, and also has the additional effect of blinding creatures it hits for 1 minute. So some people actually consider Sunburst the best spell at 8th level that's the Fireball equivalent, just because it's larger and has an extra blind component. Although for this list, I just go for the pure damage, and Horrid Wilting definitely beats Sunburst on that front. Next up at number 9, we have Incendiary Cloud. This ability is basically an upgraded version of Cloud Kill, as it summons a 20-foot radius sphere of smoke, which heavily obscures everything inside of it, dealing fire damage, 10d8 on a failed saving throw or half as much on a success, to creatures who are either inside of it when it first appears, or entered for the first time on their turn, and who end their turn inside of it. The spell lasts for a minute, and every turn it moves 10 feet directly away from you in a direction that you choose at the start of each of your turns. The movement is not optional, which is actually kind of a downside of the ability, because it can mean the ability just no longer affects the target of your choice anymore, unless you position yourself in order to move it directly 10 feet back where you want it. Or you have some way to move the target you want to keep inside of it along with the cloud. However, the damage it deals is pretty good. Every turn it deals 45 damage on average to creatures inside of it, which is only half a point less on average than upcasting a Fireball to 8th level. And since it lasts for a full minute, you can actually get a lot of mileage out of its damage. There's also another really good concentration spell that deals damage multiple times called Maddening Darkness, which can also cause creatures inside of it to not be able to see things. Although Incendiary Cloud deals more damage, which is basically the only reasons on this list over Maddening Darkness, because Maddening Darkness lasts for 10 minutes instead of just 1 minute, and while it may deal slightly less damage, it has a much larger radius of 60 feet and doesn't move, so it's possible to just trap someone inside of it to take damage for the full duration. And at number 8, we have Antimagic Field. This is a spell that surrounds the caster out to a radius of 10 feet, can last for up to 1 hour, and basically makes it so everything inside the radius is immune to magic, and suppresses all magical effects while inside the barrier. And because it basically turns off magic, there's a whole bunch of extra rules and stipulations inside the spell itself in order to try and explain what happens to various magical effects. Anything inside of it is just straight up immune to spells. AoE spells that are cast outside of it just kind of go around the barrier. The barrier itself is immune to being dispelled. If you walk into a magical portal, it temporarily closes. Same with magical creatures temporarily disappearing, as well as magic items losing their effects until they leave the area. And there's even an extra rule that says anti-magic fields don't cancel each other out. So if you have an anti-magic field up, you're just immune to magic unless someone is able to break your concentration. However, seeing as this is a high level spell that can only be used by a full caster who gains the ability to cast 8th level spells, and it only has a range of self, the usefulness on a spellcaster is actually pretty slim. In order to get the best use of this, you'd want one of your fighters or other non-magic users with you, in order to have them within your radius and beat up whatever you run into with your anti-magic field. And because it's only usable by high-level spellcasters who are hampered by not being able to cast magic themselves while inside their own field, it is not nearly as overpowered as it could be. Plus, a lot of monsters in the monster manual can't cast spells anyway, so it's not incredibly useful against the average enemy, although it can be incredibly useful in niche situations. Basically, this spell is kind of situational, but the situational effect it has is so good that it just has to make this list, even if there are some other 8th level spells that are just a little bit more useful. And at number 7, we have Dark Star, an ability added with Explorer's Guide to Wildmount and is only usable by Graviturgist wizards, or unless you ask your DM first. And what this spell does is create a sphere of up to 40 feet, which basically combines the effect of the Silent spell, the Darkness spell, and the other 8th level spell Maddening Darkness, in order to create a void of difficult terrain that deals damage to creatures every turn that they start their turn inside of or enter the field for the first time. Dealing a decent amount of force damage, 45 on average, which is only a half a point less than an 8th level fireball. And since it lasts for 1 minute, you get a lot of mileage with the spell if you're able to keep the creatures inside the Dark Star, which is a lot easier to do because it creates difficult terrain, and doesn't allow creatures to use verbal components, which a lot of teleportation abilities like Misty Step require. Additionally, if a creature dies to the damage inside, they're disintegrated and turned to dust along with all the items they're wearing except for magic items. So this is a pretty strong AoE that lasts for several turns. It has a whole bunch of excellent effects that are amazing for shutting down any creatures inside of it, and also deals competitive damage with Incendiary Cloud, which is a pretty premium damage for this spell level. So you really don't give up anything for having all of these amazing benefits. And unlike many of the other area of effect spells that last multiple turns, it has a built-in mechanic to keep the creatures inside of it by creating difficult terrain as well. In fact, this spell might be a little bit too good, which could explain why you have to ask your DM before you're allowed to take it. Coming in at number 6, we have Holy Aura. This is a spell that can only be upcast by clerics and grants the effect that all allies within 30 feet of radius you have advantage in all saving throws, and all creatures have disadvantage on attacks against those creatures. And in addition, it has a chance to blind fiends and undead that attack any friendly targets affected by the Holy Aura. So basically, it's an AoE buff that gives 2 of the best kinds of protection you can have. Advantage in all your saves, and of course disadvantage in all attacks against you. Having disadvantage on all attacks versus you is amazing. This is equivalent to having a +5 AC, which is the same as having 3/4 cover. This can make it so that your party is almost never hit. And of course, having advantage on your saves is obviously great too, because pretty much every AoE ability has some kind of save component in order to take half damage. So it's just an excellent buff spell that's kind of deserving of a high level spell slot, with the only other spells on this list that have a higher rating are just a little bit more broken, or incredibly strong for some other reason. Next up at number 5, we have Glibness. This is a 1-hour buff you can only cast on yourself, and is only usable by bards and warlocks, which basically gives you the effect where if you make a charisma check, you can replace the number you roll with a 15. Additionally, if someone would try to determine if you're lying, it always determines that you're telling the truth instead. So if you're going into a social situation where you have to talk, this is one of the best spells you can cast on yourself beforehand. The ability doesn't require concentration, so you can just use it outside and it will notice that you have magic cast on yourself unless they use some kind of detect magic spell. And since bards and warlocks are both charisma casters, chances are they'll have a 20 in the stat by level 15. So with this spell active, they'll have a minimum roll of 20 every time they perform any of their charisma checks. And of course, they can lie as much as they want without anybody knowing, because the buff specifically works on magical effects that might determine if you're telling a lie, to instead determine that you're telling the truth. This spell is honestly kind of overpowered for social situations, because all of your persuasion, deception, and even intimidation checks are going to have incredibly high rolls, since you can't possibly roll lower than a 20, which is usually the DC for a very hard check. Additionally, this does apply to checks for counterspell and dispel magic, so it even has some combat usefulness as well. But definitely the best use of this spell is being the ultimate social situation spell. One that is so good that I'd imagine DM who has to deal with a player that casts Glibness on themselves might secretly just increase the DC of all their checks, so the party doesn't effortlessly blow past whatever they had planned, which could make the spell less useful depending on who your DM is. And at number 4, we have Maze. This is a spell that just straight up, without a saving throw, teleports a creature of your choice within 60 feet to a demiplane, where they have to complete a maze in order to get out. And in order to attempt the maze, they have to make a DC 20 intelligence check, where the DC is set and not based on your spell save DC, in order to attempt to escape. Where if the creature succeeds the check, they're able to get out and reappear the space that they left in, or the nearest unoccupied one. Additionally, this spell has some flavor, where a Minotaur or Goristro demon automatically succeeds the check. The maze can last up to 10 minutes and requires concentration, so you can also end the effect early by just attacking whoever casts the maze and getting them to fail their concentration check. But maze is basically just a hard crowd control that completely ignores saving throws, which is kind of huge when it comes to these kinds of effects. If you use it on a boss, it doesn't matter if they have legendary resistances, because it still just sends them into the maze and they have to try to escape like anything else. Although if you do use it on the boss, then no one else can attack it while it's inside the maze, so it's best used on some other kind of supporting creature in order to get them out of the fight. or to just temporarily get rid of the boss so you can take care of its minions. And the creature has to use their action in order to even attempt to get out, so will only have their bonus action and reaction available, which most creatures in the monster manual don't really use. So at the very least, you can get rid of the creature's action for a turn, which might or might not be worth an 8th level spell slot depending on how important the creature you trapped is. Maze might be the ultimate crowd control spell that doesn't require a saving throw, because most of them have pretty minor effects, and all of the really powerful crowd control effects require saves before they apply their effects, which we'll talk about a little bit later on in this list, but for not requiring a saving throw, Maze is quite a solid pick. And at number 3, we have Animal Shapes. This spell is only available to druids and has the ability where you can turn any number of willing creatures in 30 feet of you into large or smaller beasts with a challenge rating of 4 or lower. And since there are no beasts of CR4 that fit this distinction, the strongest beast you can turn everyone into is the CR3 Giant Scorpion. Animal Shape lasts for 24 hours, and every turn you can change any of the creatures affected into any other beast you want. If a creature drops to 0 hit points, any extra damage is carried over to their original forms as they untransform, but you can simply use your action to transform them into something else during your next turn. The creatures who are transformed have their stats and abilities replaced with the new creatures, and they can't speak or cast spells unless the beast they turn into can. So, for an 8th level spell that you don't get until level 15, turning everybody into giant scorpions is a downgrade to their base kit. So a lot of people mistakenly assume Animal Shapes is kind of a useless 8th level spell. And if you're using it without any kind of prep, after just reading it for the first time, it can definitely be kind of useless. However, this spell might possibly be one of the most broken spells at this level, if you're able to use it effectively. You see, this spell allows you to transform a creature every turn into a new creature, which means they gain all the hit points of that new creature instantly. So if every turn you just change everybody into a giant scorpion, and then into a cave bear, they'll basically have full health every turn, and your enemy won't be able to take out your party unless they're able to do a full party wipe in a single round, because you can just constantly heal them back into full health by transforming them into a new animal. And the effect lasts for 24 hours, so you almost have unlimited health during the duration. And also, the ability to constantly transform everybody individually means you can use this as the ultimate dungeon exploring tool. You can turn everybody into a spider in order to crawl along the walls or through cracks, then transform everyone to giant scorpions once they reach a room to attack something, or into an ape in order to attack from range. Additionally, Animal Shapes allows you to target any number of willing creatures that you can see within a 30-foot range. So if, for example, you're preparing to take advantage of this way beforehand, and your DM gives you the okay, you could have a bag full of friendly rats, or any other kind of small vermin or insects, and transform them into giant scorpions in order to have an army of giant scorpions to take down whatever target you sick them on. Now, carrying around a bag of rats in order to transform them into a giant scorpion might make some DMs pretty angry if you just try to spring it on them without explaining what you're trying to do beforehand. But it is technically something you are able to do with the spell, just so long as you're able to ensure that all those creatures are friendly towards you, which is something you can do with a few casting of animal friendships in the days beforehand. You can use it in order to travel faster by turning everybody into birds, and then when you get to your destination, just transform everybody into some other beast or back into the normal forms. You can even turn everybody into giant badgers in order to dig underneath something, since they have a burrow speed. So, if you're very creative with your prep work and using Animal Shapes, it can be a pretty overpowered spell. If you just use it without prep in the middle of combat, it's kind of underwhelming, as you're turning your powerful party members into CR3 giant scorpions, removing all of their class abilities. Due to all of the setup required in order to make this useful, this only takes the number 3 spot on this list instead of the number 1. And at number 2, we have Dominate Monster. This is one of the best crowd control spells in the game, where if you cast this on a creature within 60 feet of you and it fails the wisdom save, you basically take control of that creature for the hour duration, or until you lose concentration, or the creature eventually breaks out of the spell with its saving throws. Because once you take control of the creature, you can issue them telepathic commands in order to perform general courses of action, like attack that creature over there, or fetch an object for me. And if the creature completes an order and doesn't receive any further directions, it will just defend itself to the best of its abilities, but still be charmed by you and be friendly to you and your party members. Additionally, you can use your action to take precise control over the target, where you can have the creature do whatever you want. And unlike most control spells in the game, Dominate Monster specifically excludes the clause where you can't tell it to hurt itself. So, what's really great about Dominate Monster is that it basically removes an enemy from the battle and gives you an ally to help you in that battle at the same time. So it could be considered a crowd control and summon ability all in one, and both of those things' values are highly dependent on which creatures you cast the spell on, since it's a pure save or suck spell, meaning if the creature succeeds the saving throw, they completely resist the effect and you just lose the spell slot. It's probably not a good idea to cast on a boss monster that has legendary resistances. However, the creature also has a chance to make a new saving throw every time it takes damage. where if they succeed they can break the effect early. So while you do get a creature that can help fight, if it takes too much damage it might just break the effect early and then join the battle again. Although if it breaks due to damage, that means it did take some damage and is weaker than it was before while it was fighting on your side, so it's still a net positive as long as it took enough damage. And that's also damage that could have been taken by your other party members, which was taken by the creature instead. Really, there's so many benefits to being able to control one of your opponents that it's no wonder it takes an 8th level spell slot in order to cast it on any creature. And finally, at number 1, we have Illusory Dragon. This ability creates a dragon illusion that looks exactly like a real dragon. If you touch it, it feels like a real dragon, and it's able to breathe a breath weapon just like a real dragon that's able to deal a type of damage based on what kind of dragon you want to look like. And also, when the dragon is summoned, it forces all enemies to perform a wisdom saving throw or be frightened of it for 1 minute. And as a bonus action on each of your turns, you can have it use its breath weapon and move up to 60 feet, where the breath weapon deals 7d6 damage of the chosen type, or about 25 damage on average, slightly less than a 3rd level fireball. However, this dragon also does take up space like a real creature, and even provides cover like a real creature. And the best part, which is kind of dependent on your DM, is that the dragon looks like a real dragon, and creatures must use their action in order to determine if it's a real dragon or not. If they're able to succeed in an investigation check versus your spell save DC, they're able to determine that it's not a real dragon. And the only benefits they get from this is being able to see through it, and having advantage against its breath, which they still take damage from. So, based on your DM, the Illusory Dragon could soak a lot of damage as your enemies try to attack it, but as it's an illusion, it is completely immune to damage and all crowd control conditions. And if they find it suspicious, they have to waste a full action trying to investigate it. That investigation still might fail, while taking damage from its breath weapon every turn. However, if your DM is kind of a party pooper, they might immediately have all creatures try to perform an investigation check, and then have the ones that succeed just ignore the dragon and attack the rest of the party like normal, or even worse, have the first one to succeed tell all their allies it's an illusion and to not attack it, and have their allies immediately believe them without any hesitation. So it can be incredibly powerful if enough damage is wasted trying to attack it, but has the same issues as all illusion spells do, in that they're only really as good as your DM allows them to be. Luckily for Illusory Dragon, even baseline with one of the worst DMs who hates illusions and completely plays against them, the Illusory Dragon is still a pretty solid choice, as it can do a lot of damage over a couple of turns with its bonus action breath weapon. Although, whether the Illusion Dragon is better than something like Dominate Monster, a fully optimized animal shapes, or even Holy Aura, is definitely up for debate. But the potential of summoning a dragon that's immune to damage, can inflict a crowd control on summon, and deals damage every turn for a minute, is kind of hard to beat when it comes to always being useful whenever you cast it, which is why I think it's the number 1 8th level spell. Alright, and that's the list. Are there any other 8th level spells you think we may have missed that definitely should have made this list? Or do you have any ideas for future videos similar to this one? If so, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments.